Okay, so the day Saturday, July the 13th, when Donald Trump was shot, civil war almost immediately began trending on Twitter and other social media platforms. And this came specifically from conservatives, Republicans in the United States. For those who live outside of the United States, and maybe you live outside of the Western world, conservatives, Republicans, social economic conservatives in the West, including here, in the United States of America, they have this fetish about wanting civil war in the country between those who agree with them and those who disagree with them politically, socially, economically, on various issues, aka fascism. They love fascism. They want to expand their fascist reach throughout all corners of the country, and various Western states, including in Europe, are going through this state of fascism and the various dangers that come with it. And I started thinking about this. Why was civil war trending on Twitter? Why were these backward and primitive Republicans and conservatives, like, why do they want civil war in the country? And here are some of the reasons I came up with. You might have, some of your own reasons why these backward and primitive Republicans might want civil war that I possibly have overlooked. So for one, I don't know if it comes from their lust to finally use their toy guns on people. So in America, for those who don't know, a lot of Americans, even the liberal ones, the ones on the political, social left, they own guns. Almost everybody owns guns in the United States. And there are more guns than people in the United States. That's how insane it is. These conservatives, these Republicans finally want to be able to use the stockpile of guns that they have on human beings. Why? Because right now, and for years, they've been shooting their guns at target practice. So you would see, for example, on YouTube, on Facebook, I don't know who goes on Facebook anymore, on Instagram, on Twitter, and you see these tight jeans, dirty shirt wearing, look like they've never washed themselves, conservatives and Republicans shooting guns either in the desert or in a target practice facility. And so that's one possible reason that I came up with, is they have this lust for wanting to use their stockpile of guns finally on people. They want to be able to use it on people. A second reason is maybe it comes from their inherent need to carry out violence because they are a violent people with a violent history. So this is no secret. The Western world in general has a violent history, a very terroristic and a very murderous, bloodthirsty, bloodlust history, and the United States is no exception. Look at how the white colonialists decimated the Native American population. They carried out all kinds of terrorist attacks, including biological warfare on the Native American population. Look at what they did and are still doing to Black Americans in the United States, how they forcibly relocated Black Africans from Africa who were detained by these white colonial terrorists and forcibly and involuntarily forced onto a new land, forced to change their religion, learn a new language, learn customs that were not their own. And so a second reason that I came up with for these conservatives, these Republicans wanting civil war, is it's inherent in them. The violence is inherent in them, given that they are a violent people with a violent history. A third possible reason why these conservatives and Republicans want a civil war is I feel like part of it is Hollywood shade movies, whether it's James Bond or Jason Bourne or, pick any one of these people, Denzel Washington in The Equalizer. And so they have these erotic, violent fantasies of them trying to be a badass with a gun. Liberals and people on the left rarely talk like this. They rarely, if ever, and I myself have never seen it. Talk about wanting a civil war in the Western world, specifically, I'm talking about in the United States. Liberals and people on the far left don't talk about wanting to wipe out the right wing, wanting to wipe out backward and primitive Republicans. And if the very few who do, again, I've never seen this, the very few who do, unlike with the conservatives, especially if you're a white conservative, who they won't touch, either because they're scared of them or because they agree with them, the FBI, the DOJ, the CIA, they're all likely to pay them a home visit. And so if, for example, if a liberal or somebody on the far left does talk about wanting a civil war or wanting to carry out violent acts on Republicans and social and or economic conservatives, the federal government, the state government, the local law enforcement agencies are very quick to visit them in their home, in their place of residence, and quell that, put a stop to it. They're definitely not going to do that to conservatives who speak like this, think like this, breathe and sleep like this. What we also learned from that day was the Trump shooter, unsurprisingly, is white, and he was a registered Republican. If you look at an image of the shooter, he looks like one of the Appalachian whites, or what I've seen online, what people call quote-unquote mountain white. Mountain white are some of the people who live in the mountains. They look a distinctive way, but and what I'm about to say, white America doesn't understand this because they're often shielded from the repercussions. Can you imagine all of the terrorist attacks, all of the hate crimes, all of the hate speech, all of the calls for violence, etc., had the shooter been Muslim or Arab or Iranian or black? I mean, we saw what happened after 9/11 and all of the Islamophobia and racism and hate crimes that were spewed and committed by these backward and primitive Americans and Westerners, not just in the United States, but in the Western world in general. And so we also saw what happened after the Black Lives Matter movement developed and the murder of George Floyd happened, and the black phobia and the anti-black racism vomited by these archaic conservative Americans and Westerners. The Western media is racist. It's Eurocentric, it's Islamophobic, and it's biased as hell. There is a massive difference in how they talk and the words they use based on if the suspect is a non-Muslim white person versus if the suspect is Muslim, Middle Eastern, black, etc. If the suspect of the crime is white, example, this incident that happened this past Saturday, July the 13th, if the suspect of the crime is white, the dogmatic Western media uses certain language like lone wolf. They call the shooter, Thomas Crooks, a lone wolf, and they humanize him. They say things like he was a loner or he was nice. They have people like his classmates, make comments about how he was quiet, he wasn't a troublemaker, he was nice, he was a sweet guy, that kind of stuff. But if he was Muslim, Arab, Iranian, or black, like look at this headline here, loner and nice. Complex portrait of gunman in Trump assassination attempt emerges. Now, if he was Muslim, Arab, Iranian, or black, there wouldn't be a quote-unquote complex portrait. They'd paint the narrative one way, demonization, straight demonization, and start asking what could have radicalized this person to do this. This topic alone deserves its own video, and hopefully I'll have time to dedicate one to it because it's a very important and significant take on and very accurate on how the Western media, the white Western media, is very biased against Muslims, Middle Easterners, specifically Arabs, Iranians, Turks, definitely against black people, against Native Americans, Polynesians, and so on, and favorable toward other groups, white people, Jews, Asians, whether it's South Asian or East East Asian, that kind of stuff. And what we also learned from the attack was the political and ideological background of the suspect, Thomas Crooks. The political background, it came out, was his mother was a registered Democrat, his father a libertarian. Most libertarians in the United States, they vote Republican, and so his father was a registered Republican. And when it came out about the suspect in particular, that he donated $15 to the Democratic Party cause, the conservatives and Republicans said, see, he was a liberal. He shot Donald Trump because he was a liberal, a leftist, and he shot him over political and ideological reasons. First of all, he was 17 years old when he donated that lone $15 to the Democratic Party cause. Second of all, very soon after he donated that $15 to the Democratic Party, soon after he registered not as a Democrat but as a Republican. The very few who wanted to hear it, there were also many Republicans and conservatives who, didn't want to hear it. They don't listen to facts. They don't believe in facts. They don't believe in the truth. They create their own. That's why conspiracy theories, especially when it comes to conservatives and people on the far right, is considerably more prevalent than conspiracy theories coming from people on the political or ideological left. The shooter was also part of a local shooting club. It was called the Clariton Sportsmen's Club, and he was a part of this local shooting club for at least a year. Now, there are liberals, like I stated earlier, and leftists who do own guns, but most often, those who do join gun clubs, including this one, this local shooting club, they often tend to be people of the political and ideological right. Also, at the day of the shooting, the shooter was wearing a t-shirt from Demolition Ranch, which is a YouTube channel that is known for its guns and demolition content. The channel has millions of subscribers. Undoubtedly, I'm sure the subscriber count went up, and they feature videos on guns and explosive devices, bombs, that kind of stuff. And so there are political, I believe, ramifications that will come out of this. These kinds of attempts, these kinds of shooting attempts have obviously happened before, and they've always helped the candidate. For example, let me give you an example. On March 30, 1981, after John Hinckley Jr. shot Ronald Reagan, who was in office for about a little over 2 months, Ronald Reagan's numbers after he was shot went up for months. They actually hit a high of 68% approval rating among the American population. That was in May of that year, May 1981, before it began declining due to Reagan's terrible handling of the economy. But we saw a boost in the approval ratings. So these kinds of things, whether you consider it an assassination or a shooting, these kinds of things often tend to benefit the political candidate. More recently, the same thing happened in Brazil, where you had fascist Jair Bolsonaro, who was stabbed in early September 2018. The following month, on October 28, there was a runoff election, and he won 55.13% of the Brazilian voters' vote over Fernando Haddad, who had 44.87% of the Brazilian vote. And so, again, that's another example of somebody who was attacked who benefited politically from that attack. But it shows you how backwards these societies are. I mentioned the United States with Ronald Reagan. I mentioned Brazil with Jair Bolsonaro. Whether it's the United States or Brazil, no matter how demonic and evil these leaders are, and both of them, whether it's Ronald Reagan or Jair Bolsonaro, they're evil and demonic. No matter how evil and demonic these leaders and their policies are, the public forgives and forgets if something bad happens to them, like an attempted assassination. They don't remember the victims of these fascist despots or the evils they committed. It's kind of a double standard, where if you're a political figure or a popular figure or a powerful figure, whether politically, economically, financially, socially, you can commit all kinds of evils, and people will forgive and forget all of the evils you've committed against the people if something bad happens to you. And it happened to George Bush. A lot of people, even liberals, they forget and forgive him for what he did in Iraq and Afghanistan, all of the terrorism, all of the murders, all of that kind of stuff. And so it's indicative of how primitive, how evil, how barbaric these societies are. And so we talked about Trump assassination attempt. Let me bring it home with this. The West has a disease. It has many diseases, actually. One of the diseases that it has is they commit evil against others around the world. But when it happens to them, they want the entire world to stop for them. Let me give you an example. So Donald Trump called for the assassination and murder of people around the world. Nearly every president, and I'm not excusing it, I'm giving more context to it. Nearly every president, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, because they're two sides of the same corrupt coin, Democrats and Republicans. They differ on trivial things, but when it comes to some of the main things, they agree wholeheartedly and they practice the same policies. One of the best examples with Donald Trump about him calling for the assassination and murder of people around the world was in 2019 when the dictator and fascist in chief, Donald Trump, ordered the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. It's unacceptable to have Western dictators, Western despots, Western tyrants call for and practice and commit evil terrorist attacks, murders, maiming, all of these kinds of evil acts. But when it happens to them, they want the entire world to stop. Trump and his regime were so assassination obsessed that his own lawyers argued that Trump has presidential immunity if he decides to assassinate his domestic political opponents. And they argued this like 6 months ago, around January 2024. 6 months later, on July the 1st, 2024, the first of this month, the fucking conservative extremist court agreed with him and said, yeah, presidents do actually have immunity, which further pushes whole America into the trajectory of fascism that we've been going on for over 20 years since fucking dictator Bush. May God condemn him. And so Trump, I have no sympathy for fascist terrorists and murderers. That's what I have to say about this topic and a variety of other topics that I discussed. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Definitely like and subscribe. It's free and it helps build your community. Take care, guys.